if I believe the theory, isn't it? It's like it's raising the basement. So it's saying like this is now the requirement to get a mate. So if I'm out there and I'm being more liberal with my sex, then you have to be more liberal if you want a partner.
Okay,
Otherwise, you can't
yeah.
compete. But I feel like that's silly because there's this idea that anyone that's in my previous profession or anyone that's in any atypical relationship, it's that they're not in control of their sexuality and that they're kind of chaotic and they're just going to consume whatever is in front of them and that they're not practicing discipline. And just because you're not monogamous doesn't mean you're not disciplined. It also doesn't mean that you're not devoted to whoever you're with. There's so many different kinds of relationships. And there's this other book that I've been reading. It's called The Way We Never Were. And I actually almost threw it away because I was reading the back.
Yes.
Have you?
Yes.
You read it?
It talks about how the nuclear family is a myth. Yeah.
Right. And it's debunking so much, but I was like, this is going to be super woke. I don't know why
No,
I got
it's not
it.
woke at
And
all.
it's
Yeah.
so good. It is very factual.
It drives me crazy, that book. The book does drive me crazy. It drives me crazy when I talk to conservatives how the nuclear family is this like Hollywood invention from the 50s. And if you want to look at history, it's the extended family. And they say it's the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. The nuclear family is mom, dad, 2 kids and a dog and in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very dangerous thing because if mom or dad are drunk, abusive, there's nowhere to go. Or if you have the extended family, uncles around, cousins around, grandmas around, there's always someone for a backup. And that's really a much better approach. Grandma watches the kids instead of putting them in a government school or having some caretaker who you never know who this person is going to be, what's going to happen on their eye. So I am a fan of the conservative idea of let's look at what looked historically, but their idea of the nuclear family being the historical basis is completely a myth. And the extended family is the way to go.
Right. And I was doing this homework assignment. It was on logical fallacies, which was really fun. And that was one of the top 10 was reverting back to the way things always have been, or saying like historically, this has been what is true tradition. And that you can't look at that because that is constantly evolving. So like traditional in what way, like which decade are we kind of talking about? And the whole idea about monogamy being like the way that we have evolved to be is there's so much pushback on that alone. In that The Way We Never Were, she was explaining that the average marriage wasn't more than 10 years traditionally because one or both people would die. So we are now in this place where monogamy is the factory setting. You cannot have a conversation around anything else, but in 10 years is now supposed to be 60. And then we look at this model and we have, I don't know what the divorce rate is, and it's probably like high 30s, low 40s if you take out like the serial like divorcees, which is still pretty high. So you're like, well, this cookie cutter model is also not working. So why can't I have a conversation and consciously choose what's right for me? And maybe you end up at monogamy, but that's going to be so much more pure and like a higher level, like you're playing at a better game than I'm just doing this because society told me this is the right and the only way.
I can't, but at the same time, like if the girl brings up poly, that to me, and I think to a lot of guys, means she's got one foot out the door.
Well, that's one thing is poly is one. And then you have Dan Savage calls like monogamish.
What's that mean?
It's like you would be very intentional about the boundaries within your relationship, and everyone's is going to be extremely different. But it's, to my understanding, it's more just sexual. Like you can't entertain a relationship outside of the relationship.
Okay. I know this works for some people, but it's not like you can control
For
if you
sure.
develop feelings. So you might go into it, okay, I'm just going to have some fun. But if you click with someone and you're having fun with them, how's that not going to develop feelings of intimacy? And I know I had Jeffrey Miller on my show. His Twitter handle is Primal Poly, and he's, he looks at this scientifically and just understands this lifestyle. And a lot of things he was saying, and I don't judge, but it just was alien to how I'm wired. Because he says it's very common in this space when people hook up with somebody, they get that like some kind of attraction, like and you have to understand it's not real and you have to stick to your primary. And I'm like, this just seems like a lot of math and also like it's also kind of insincere because like if you're going to go down this road that it's okay to sleep with other people, why isn't it okay to have romantically intimate with other people? Because I have friends that I love, like ride or die, but it's not just one. And I'm never gonna have to choose between one or the other. So this is kind of a slippery slope, and I can't wrap my head around it personally.
I think it comes down to like availability and complexity. So you have to take a snapshot of your life and what do you want for your future. So there's this thing that Jamie Wheel talks about. Do you know Jamie Wheel? I think you'd really like him. He wrote his most recent book is Recapture the Rapture, but he's just kind of like an intellect and best-selling author, like yourself. But he he says like you can have one of three things, and I think it's you can have a lifelong partner, a purpose, like a really passionate reason that you're here, like almost dharmic, kids, and a paramour. And you can't have all of those. You have to nix one of them. And he's never seen anyone successfully at the same time have all of those things. So I think when you're looking at it, it's for some people it is way too much. Just like you said, like there's a lot of math here. There is a lot of math there. And there's also a lot of emotions, and there's a lot of undoing and like taking off these layers that have kind of been put on you. So if you don't want to do that, I get it. But I guess it just goes back to getting down to first principles of like, why do you want to be monogamous? And so many people do that out of like a possessive way and not a healthy way. So it's not to get people to break the system by any means. It's just like examine it a little bit so that you can consciously make that choice.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Not really.
No?
I'm all for property rights. So I think possessiveness is a good thing.
I think in a way, if you have this idea that this person is yours,
right?
I think that starts making you slowly put a cage around them. And they're going to do what they're going to do. I think it's like a false sense of security and safety and commitment. It's if you aren't allowed to go out to the bar with your friends past a certain time.
Well, that's very different.
Well,
Okay,
that is possessive because that's my person. If you're my person,
no, but you still trust them.
If you would, for some people, yeah. So what would you call the other thing?
Well, I paranoia. That's if I have a car, right? It's my car. And you're my friend and you're in Austin and you're like, hey, can I borrow this car? I'm fine with you borrowing. I'm not going to sit there wondering, is she going to, repaint it or scratch it up or something like that. So if in my view, your partner and you do have that intimate connection to the point where you have this sense of possessiveness, you'd also know if they're like going to be cheating on you, that's on them. That shows that kind of is kind of tautological because they're not the person that you fell in love with. Because if they're comfortable doing that to you just for the sake of some sense of pleasure or short-term, sexuality, it's just like, well, this isn't who I kind of want to own.
Yeah, I agree with that. So that's why I think when you have like these really restrictive, and I guess they're more just jealousy tendencies, it's pointless to me because again, they're going to do what they want. And Esther Perel talks about like the transformation of the word monogamy, how it used to mean one person, that's it until we die. And then somehow it's kind of gone into one person at a time. And she's like,
serial monogamy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which isn't like the true version of it. And then most people, she says like monogamy only exists in reality because there's no monogamy in your past because you have previous lovers, assuming, and there's no monogamy in your fantasies because everyone fantasizes a little bit. So we also have this warped idea of what that means. And we have this idea of monogamy. And then what happens is you have some people that are really devoted and they actually practice it. They're very faithful. But then you have other people that end up, they're monogamous, but then they're cheating. So then there's this alternative, which is consensual non-monogamy. So it's like, for some reason, I feel like it's better to cheat and not get caught than to have the conversation of having an alternative relationship.
It's kind of game theory. Yeah. But it's not consensual if you don't know what you're consenting to, right? Do you know what I mean? It's just like if you can't, again, maybe I'm just too vanilla. I don't see how you can guarantee to your partner that you're not going to catch feels. Like I just feel like that's kind of insincere.
Well, I think it's a choice. Even with monogamy, it's a choice. So it's sticking with your commitment to that person because most people, if you have an affair, it's someone that you work with because you're seeing this person day in, day out, and you see them probably more than you see your husband or wife, and that is within a closed container, and it still happens. And you still said it's you until I die, but it's happening even without the allowance. So I think in a weird way, a lot of people that are in alternative relationships, they have made that devotion and that commitment to that one person. It's like, regardless, you're my person, whatever else happens is inconsequential. And ironic.
You don't know that.
No, but if you do look at some of the numbers, so Ayla ran this poll because people automatically assume that relationships just kind of implode if you introduce anything other than one person at one time.
No, but what I'm saying is you don't know that it's inconsequential. You don't know that if you spend an afternoon with someone, you can't guarantee it's not going to matter.
No, I'm not saying that I can guarantee it, but I'm saying like if you were to look at large groups of people that are doing this. So what I'm saying is it's almost like more provocative and alluring because it's forbidden and you don't know how to handle it. And then there's also not that kind of neural pathway to talk to your partner about what happens if something like that were to occur because it's so emotionally driven. Whereas if you have someone that's in an alternative relationship, they've had that conversation several times at nauseum. So if something does happen with that, that's outside of the bounds, they're a lot more comfortable to kind of resolve the issue, where the other one is like, I'm taking the kids, you have a second house, or I will never see you again. It's like a lot more erratic. So if the affair happens, I think that it's a bigger deal within the monogamous container because, again, like you're not prepped for it. And I think it's easier for someone in an atypical relationship to make sure that it doesn't get to someplace it's not supposed to get.
Sure. By the way, the reason I was laughing is while we were talking, was reminded of the most embarrassing moment of my life.
Oh no, tell me.
You'll have to I'll tell you after the air just to fuck with the audience. And it's kind of speaks to what we were talking about, not like romantically at all, but I'll tell you and it'll be really, really, really funny.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to be on the edge of my seat until we're done.
Yeah.